All right, and here we go. All right, hello and welcome everyone to tonight's event at 192 Books, presented by 192 and Paul Cooper Gallery. I am Evan, the manager of 192 Books, and I am so glad to have everyone with us tonight to celebrate Sergei Lebedev's new novel, Untraceable, translated by Antonina Bouis and translated or published by the New Vessel Press. This is really like a one-of-a-kind novel, a metaphysical spy novel, right on the bleeding edge of Russian history, politics, and culture. Super interesting, and I'm so glad that tonight we've got Sergei Lebedev, Amy Knight, Nina Bouis, and Michael Wise joining us. It's going to be an incredible panel. You can get full biographical information on all our panelists right on this page below. But just as a quick introduction, Sergei Lebedev is a poet, essayist, journalist, and novelist. Previous books include Oblivion and Year of the Comet, which are also out from New Vessel Press. Amy Knight is a leading scholar in the West of the KGB and the author of Orders to Kill, the Putin Regime, and Political Murder, most recently. Antonina Bouis is a leading translator of Russian literature. She's translated over 80 works from authors such as Bulgakov and Sakharov. And Michael Wise is the founder of New Vessel Press, an independent publisher that specializes in literary work translated into English. And as a bookstore, that's just, we're so focused on translation, so it's one of our favorite publishers. So also tonight, if you have a question for any of the panel, you can send it to evan@192books.com. There is an email below. We're going to try to get to some questions at the end of the night, but we obviously have a ton to talk about. So now, all that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Michael Wise, and here we go. Enjoy, everyone.
Thank you, Evan. Thanks to everyone at 192 Books for organizing this event. We're here this evening to discuss a decidedly timely book, Untraceable by Sergei Lebedev. It's a spy novel and a literary thriller with deadly serious intent. In it, Sergei probes the ethical responsibilities of scientists who've supplied modern tyrants and autocrats with ever newer instruments of retribution, destruction, and control. He has called the quest by the Soviet Union and Russia for an untraceable poison to be used on dissidents and defectors who would criticize or spill state secrets, the Frankenstein monster of the 20th century. He began writing this book after the 2018 poisoning of a former Russian secret agent and his daughter in England with a deadly neurotoxin known as Novichok. It has now taken on a heightened, even grimmer urgency with the poisoning and then the imprisonment earlier this week, on the same day that Untraceable was published in English, of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Sergei is a marvelous author, justly praised, in the words of Vladimir Sorokin, for the nobility of his style and his precise inner vision, which allows him to plumb the depths of the anthropological catastrophe that has occurred in modern Russia. Born in Moscow, he worked for 7 years on geological expeditions in the north of his country and in Central Asia. And this experience of observing multiple layers of the Earth's terrain and human impact upon it has served him well and found echoes in his fiction. His novels have been translated into many languages, and New Vessel Press is proud to have published not only Untraceable, but the earlier 3 books, Oblivion, The Year of the Comet, and The Goose Fritz. And these extraordinary novels have all been translated by Antonina Bouis, who is here with us tonight to discuss the newest, along with Dr. Amy Knight, one of the West's top scholars of the KGB. So we're going to begin with a short reading by Nina of an excerpt from her book, from her translation of the book, from the opening chapter. And this will give a sense of Sergei's extraordinary writing, his sharp eye for detail and character portrayal, and not to mention a very intense sense of drama. Nina?
Thank you, Michael. This is the first chapter of the book. The main character is a defector who's been given a new identity and a new face, practically a new body. And he is taken a long walk in a very hot August day to go to his favorite restaurant He already suspects that his cover has been blown, but he decides to go and eat. He arrives at, it's an outdoor restaurant, and he preferred sitting among people dining sedately behind strangers. In the midst of subtle conversation, the clinking of knives and forks, where it is hard to eavesdrop, photograph, or take aim. His favorite part of the restaurant is very crowded, and he can't get a table where he would be among other people. And now I'll start reading. But he felt the charm of the play of light in the chestnut leaves, the clay blue tablecloths pressed so that there wasn't a single wrinkle, the high-necked bottles of ice water, the harmless murmur of neighbors, the balletic moves of waiters balancing enormous trays of 6 to 8 plates on their shoulders, where atop of the delicately tossed salad looking as if arranged by a coiffeur, the leaves green with reddish veins, floated golden breaded schnitzels. Viren ordered beer and a steak. Wasps flew toward the fragrant hops. They were not attracted by the remains of dessert on nearby plains, rivulets of honey and chocolate, only by hops. They crawled around the rim of his mug and tried to land on his shoulder, his hand circling persistently and stubbornly. He waved them away, almost spilling his beer. He had a bad allergy to insect bites. Back when he was in the service, the doctors told him it would get worse over the years and offered him a medical discharge. Wasps, wasps, wasps. He moved the mug away, flipped a wasp, and then another from the table, regretting he had not brought a jacket. A sting on the nape of his neck, sudden, as painful as an injection administered by an inexperienced nurse. He slapped the bite, but the wasp was gone. He turned, intent on the pain, and noticed a man walking away and getting into a car. The license plates were not local. His neck ached. The pain spread up and down to his shoulder, cheek, temple. He felt something microscopic in the wound, probably the stinger. His vision clouded. His breathing became shallow. His body was engulfed by dry heat. He got up with difficulty and headed for the toilet. Rinse. He needed to rinse with cold water, take a pill, but wash first. Such pressure in his throat. He might not be able to swallow the pill. His skin was burning. He could barely stand. He leaned against the sink, clumsily splashed water on his face. The wasp sting was on the right side of his neck, and his right arm was stiff. He shoved the tablet into his throat. The mirror showed a gray, bloodless, but swollen face, as if something was trying to undo the plastic surgery and force his old look back on him. The tablet should have worked by now. It was the latest medicine, but it wasn't working. A rash broke out on the gray skin. His stomach cramped. He sank to the floor, staring at the tiles, and understood. That man had not been a customer at the restaurant. Locals didn't park where he had stopped the car. With a final effort, he rose, holding onto the walls, made his way into the corridor. His constricted throat kept him from screaming, calling for help. On the porch, he bumped into a waiter carrying a tray of bottles and wine glasses. The waiter assumed he was dead drunk and moved aside. He fell from the porch, taking the waiter with him, hearing the crashing glass and hoping that everyone noticed and was looking. He hissed and gurgled into someone's ear. Ambulance, police, murder, not drunk, poison. I've been poisoned. And he collapsed, still hearing the sounds of the world, but no longer understanding what they meant. It's a very exciting start to the book.
So now the poison is starting to take effect. Sergei, tell us why you wrote this book and how it came about.
Okay. I think there is two main reasons behind. The first one is general. My interest to the secret services has a long background, because my family's history in the 20th century, my Russian family's history in the 20th century, was mostly and largely formed or written by the actions of the state security. From the earliest years, from the 1917 until the last years of the Soviet Union, my relatives were expelled, arrested, executed, forced to collaborate, pressed to be informers. You can prolong this list further. So it's something very personal. And when you see that the same, or more or less the same structure, more or less the same service, are in action again, are in service again, and they more or less proceed with the same measures, with the same principles, with the same ethics, which is not ethics at all, you think you should do something about this. But the second reason was even more strange and even more personal. In 2018, when the poisoning in Salisbury was revealed as poisoning, in the stream of the news, I spotted one small detail. It was reported that the Novichok was probably developed in a small secret city in Russia, which was called Shikhane. I mean, nobody paid attention. Shikhane. I mean, you have hundreds of such secret cities in Russia. But for me, this name meant a lot, because before I was writing the novel which was called Goose Streets, which is published by Universal Press. The novel which explores the history of Russia and Germany and the history of secret military collaboration between Russia and Germany in the beginning of the 20s and the 20s, when the Red Army and the Reichswehr together developed the chemical warfare in the Soviet Union, because Germany was under the restrictions of the Versailles Treaty. So Shikhane was established in 1927, Germans and Soviets together. It was the same Germans, more or less the same Germans, more or less the same scientists, who just 10 years before started the very history of the chemical warfare, who in 1915 first used it near the Ypres. And the Portendown, the laboratory in Portendown, which was involved in the investigation of the Salisbury poisoning, was established in 1915 as a response to the threat of the German chemical warfare. And I said to myself, okay, but these are the circle. This is the circle. The history meets its ends and origins. And I decided to probe this long shadow behind the actual killing, the long shadow from the Novichok to the past.
And how much actual research in archives or in doing interviews and historical research did you use to develop your narrative?
Okay, I would like to not to explain everything behind it. Yes, I had an access to some archival materials actually, which helped me to write about the, I wouldn't say inner world, but the inner reality of these services. Yeah, so from one point we can say that this book is not written just you write the detective stories without knowledge how the police is functioning. No, there is some historical and archival research behind it. especially especially in the field of operative activities.
Amy Knight, you have devoted your career to this kind of historical research. How do you see a fictional account like Untraceable of the kind of topics that you've worked on? And can you also tell us a little bit about the long history of political assassination in Russia and in the Soviet Union?
Well, I have to say it was particularly enlightening and exciting for me to read this novel, because it's so different to study and read and talk about what the Soviet and Russian security services are doing, and knowing about people who've been poisoned and murdered by the Soviet and then Russian regime. But I think what this book does is it conveys the underlying moral atmosphere that obviously has to be there for this kind of thing to happen. And Russian literature has always been a very effective vehicle for conveying the political atmosphere in the country. If we look at Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Solzhenitsyn, you learn a lot, not just about people, you learn a lot about the country. And so I think this novel really gave me a lot of new insight. And it's also, to me, a study of what kind of people make these poisons and on behalf of the state, and the moral compromises they make. And one doesn't really think about that from my standpoint normally, as somebody who's writing about more the institutional history. So, but I did my most recent book, I did go back and look at political murder as a kind of a phenomenon. Not just poisoning, but all sorts of grisly acts. And I do point out in my book that Russia has a very long history of political murder. So do other countries. I don't think Russia has a particular proclivity to do this, but it's quite interesting. In 1718, Peter the Great killed his own son. His son was charged with treason for consorting with one of Peter's enemies. And Catherine the Great, her long reign was a result of regicide. Her husband, Peter III, was murdered in 1762, probably on her instigation. And then if we look at the Soviet period, there are quite a few prominent political murders. I wrote a whole book about Sergei Kirov, who was killed. He was a competitor of Stalin, and he was shot in December of 1934 by a crazed assailant. But of course, there's a lot of evidence that Stalin actually set the whole thing up. Then Maxim Gorky, the writer, there is speculation that I think certainly raises a lot of questions about his death in 1936. He was starting to cause Stalin a lot of displeasure. And he was actually supposedly died of pneumonia, but he was surrounded by all these doctors. And some people have hypothesized that Gorky's food was poisoned by a substance that was manufactured at a special NKVD poison laboratory in Moscow. So this would have been the poison lab that then went on to, continued. I don't imagine it was the exact same place, but it just shows you that the sort of history of secret poisons goes back to the Stalin era. And then we have all these very more recent political killings under Mr. Putin, under President Putin. Anna Politkovskaya, who was shot to death in the stairwell of her apartment building in 2006. Alexander Litvinenko, poisoned by polonium in London. Boris Nemtsov, shot in February 2015 on a bridge just outside the Kremlin. There are others as well. More recently, or not more recently, another case that's hypothetical is Boris Berezovsky, the Russian oligarch who sought asylum in London. His death by hanging is still not solved. It's in the coroner couldn't decide whether he'd been murdered or not, and he was a bitter enemy of Mr. Putin. So there are all sorts of examples, both within Russia and abroad, where the Russian state has initiated a violent end to people that it viewed as either traitors, like the Skripals, or a threat to their own security, or whatever, political enemies.
On US territory, there was a death in Washington just a few years ago that it still remains under investigation as well, right?
Yes, Mikhail Lesin, who used to be the head of Gazprom Media. Yes, that's very interesting. I have a colleague, a friend at Radio Liberty, who found out that the FBI had actually done quite a bit of investigation into the Lesin death. And as you probably know, he died in a Washington D.C. hotel room, and he had all sorts of bruises. And he was a terrible alcoholic. So the sort of consensus and the initial statement by the U.S. authorities was that he had died of falls. He just kept getting drunker and falling. But then they did more forensic studies, and questions have been raised about that initial assessment because of a particular break in his neck bone. And so, yes, that is, there's a question mark about that. Mm-hmm. And Lesin, we don't know for sure, but supposedly he was going to talk to the FBI about corruption. And I mean, all of this is speculation, but yes, that's one example of a possible.
Right. Sergei, you mentioned the ethical or unethical environment in which this research has been carried out. Can you talk a little bit about how you see science as having been distorted in Russia over the years for these purposes?
You know, first of all, when I started to think about this topic, I realized that I have some example from my childhood, I would say, because one of close friends of our family in the same time, the distant relative, was quite a figure in my childhood. He was the most not anti-Soviet but non-Soviet person in the whole circle. His flat was full of these things which never belonged to the Soviet world, some of them foreign, some antique. He spoke very clear and exquisite Russian. He had some rituals in his house which I never met, including celebration of some religious dates and so on. So, but I mean, the very air in his apartment was absolutely different. And really, for a long period, I was sure that, I mean, he's a magical person. He is sent from somewhere to our gray and strange reality. And only a lot of years later, I got the message that actually he was the military chemist who worked on biological warfare. I mean, and I said to myself, how you can combine this? How you can combine this devotion and service to the Soviet Union with an absolute non-loyalty and restricted freedom in your house? And this was the starting point. Actually, if you will recall the Solzhenitsyn's novel in the First Circle, this is the book, the only and the major book in Russian which raises these questions, the question about collaboration. They are a little bit wider than just the science and the totalitarian power. We are missing this this topic. We are missing this problem, because the issue of the collaboration, the issue of different ways of collaboration with the regime is not raised. It wasn't raised in the Soviet Union, after the Soviet Union, and even now. And because of this, for me, it was very important to talk about science. Now in the Russian media, when they need some expertise on Novichok, they simply invite those who was working on it, like an expert. And they start to say, okay, yes, we did this essence. Maybe now it's a little bit modified, but still, yes, it was very effective. I mean, how you can invite them? just like they produce the new sort of the toothpaste, but now nobody questions this. And there is only one person whose name is Vilmir Zayanov, who was the chemist who worked on Novichok, and who in the late 80s and in the early 90s transformed himself completely. He understood actually what they were doing. And he became a whistleblower, he wrote a book, he exposed the fact that Russia is still working on the chemical warfare. He was arrested, then he fled to US. This is the normal way of how the things should go. Yeah, but what I see now in Russia, from this, it's clear that nobody is questioning the role of the supporters, of the collaborations, of the inventors. And of course, if we will take the Stalin's time, with the wave of the real cruel repressions, you don't need some special technique for this. You need a typewriter and a gun, actually. But when it's a different time, when you need to keep the smoke screen, when you have no right to execute everybody on the spot, the role of technique, the role of knowledge, the role of intelligence is absolutely different. We know it from the history of Stasi with their excellent techniques of control. And we know it's from the story of the KGB. It's all about the secret manipulation, secret control, and secret means, secret tools. This is actually the very strange moral landscape. This is the very strange moral landscape which still exists. And it exists not only in Russia.
When you say all you need is the typewriter and the gun, you mean, you're saying that you've also said that contemporary Russian novelists are not dealing with the real depiction of reality in Russia today in their works.
I mean, let's speak about the books. I wouldn't say anything about the novelists. But if you will just go through the lists of books which are published, you will assume that everything is okay in Russia. Nothing happens. And in the same time, I will list some crucial things which are not described, which are not talked about. Okay, 25 years ago, more than 25 years ago, the quarter of the century, Boris Yeltsin started the first Chechen war. I mean, this war affected Russia, the whole post-Soviet space, the fate of Europe. I mean, where are the books? Even the classic Russian literature. It's all about the Caucasus, about the experience of the Russian officers and vice versa and so on. Where are the books? All lawlessness which we experience now with Russia had started there in Chechnya. But
Chechnya plays a big role in this book. Can you tell a little bit about how it appears?
Yeah, but I mean, Because now when people are witnessing this law enforcement officers who are wearing the masks, and they are asking themselves where they come from on the streets of Moscow, it looks like they're from Mars, or it looks like they're insects. No, they're not insects, they're not from Mars. For 25 years, they operated in Chechnya in the same mode. They were all raised on this war. But nobody wanted to know this. Nobody wanted to even mention this, because if you will see the agenda of the Russian opposition, you will not see the demand for the tribunal for those who committed the crimes during the Chechen war. They will speak only about the corruption, but it's a moral corruption, not just financial corruption. And it's a murder, not the stealing the money for the Putin's parents. It's more serious things behind. And actually, when I was reading the reports on Salisbury, I spotted that one of the probable assassins, yes, he has a military background in Chechnya. And I said, okay, it's clear. It's clear they are all from this black hole.
Sergei, I think that's such a good point, and I was so taken with your description of Sherzhnev, who served in Chechnya, and he committed that terrible crime against that teenage Chechen boy. And the way you describe him afterwards, I mean, he's psychologically damaged after carrying out this act of just wanton violence. And I think, I think you're correct. I would only say one thing, is that Anna Politkovskaya wrote a lot about the Chechen War. And I have her books on my bookshelf. And of course, she ended up, one of the reasons that she was shot to death was because of her reporting on Chechnya.
Yeah, and Emmy, I just want to add one thing. In December, the Russian media outlet, which is called Polka, it's a leading outlet about the literature. They composed the list of 100 best books written in Russia in 21st century. They found no place for Politkovskaya. And this is what I'm talking about.
And the writing is so beautiful. I mean, she describes a beautiful writer.
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Even if she wrote this, she will be excluded post-mortem, because nobody wants to admit this, unfortunately.
Well, that's a big issue in general. Russian literature used to deal with moral issues. Russian writers considered themselves honor-bound to shed light on the problems of the society and to lead people to a higher plane, where I take any classical Russian writer, that they had a moral stance. And that's why I'm so pleased to translate Sergei, because Lebedev is really perhaps the only Russian writer, contemporary Russian writer, who's looking at what's going on in his society, in his world. All the books, all the novels are about coming to terms with the reality and the lies that we deal with. No other writers are approaching this. They write science fiction, they write about dystopia, they write about horrible things, but they don't have a moral viewpoint about what's going on. Thank you very much, Sergei, for writing what you do, because it's such an eye-opener, not only about Russian life, but also about what we should all be thinking about, not just in Russia, but in the rest of the world. I mean, scientists, think about all the physicists who worked on bombs. They weren't interested in killing people. They were interested in seeing how powerful they could make a bomb because they could, right? And then people like Sakharov, who disowned the whole project and became a human rights champion. The whole problem of what scientists do is so enormous.
Go ahead, Sergei.
Yes, and I wanted just to add one more thing and ask Emmy to comment on it. Um, and I think what is going on now in Russia, and not only in Russia, is even more dangerous than it was in the Soviet Union in one particular sense. Because, of course, Soviet Union used the lethal poisons inside the country and outside the country. But these were clandestine operations. They were not advertised, they were not publicized. What we see now, when these Salisbury assassins are sitting on the TV and pretending they have been tourists, I mean, it's a new weapon of the moral destruction. I mean, for the Russian nation, for the Russian population, because it's openness of the evil. It's sort of sincerity of the evil when they are openly saying, okay, yeah, you can do nothing to us. We will proceed in the same mode. We will do what we want, but we will not hide anymore. I mean, of course, we will pretend that it's not we, but it's just a game, you know? And this is such a devastating effect, I think, because it really provokes sort of the moral collapse.
I think that I totally agree with you. And I think, well, it's, yes, in the Soviet period, of course, they had society so much under their control that they really didn't need to do more than arrest some dissidents, exile Solzhenitsyn. That was enough, because the machinery of repression worked so well that they never had to go and do the kind of things that they're doing, that the Putin regime is doing. I'm sure that they would have had no moral qualms about doing it. It's just simply that it wasn't necessary. And now, and I'm sure you probably agree, Sergei, this is really a sign almost of the weakness of the regime, that they need to be doing this to not only to get rid of people like Navalny and Nemtsov, but also to serve a message, a warning to other people. And to me, it is really a sign of weakness, but also it's a sign of the moral depravity of the entire government. And I think it is very, I read a lot of the opinion polls that Lebedev Center did right after the poisoning of Navalny and everything. I mean, until Navalny actually came back to Russia, people really didn't have much of an opinion one way or the other. And yet they all knew that he'd been poisoned by the Russian government. Or did they, Sergei?
Actually, I wouldn't agree totally that it's the sign of weakness. Of course, it's a totally different reality, and the grip on the population is not as institutionalized as it was. Because in the Soviet period, it was more or less about the institutes, rituals, the chains of loyalty, and so on. Now it's more or less about the propaganda, about the emotional passes, I would say. But still, I wouldn't say that it's less effective. And until Navalny was in Berlin, I mean, of course, a lot of people understood what was going on, but nobody went to the streets. Nobody. I mean, it was just a silence. It was necessary for him to come back alive, like a little bit like after resurrection. Like a different person, like a little bit in the Russian fairy tale, yeah? When the hero goes through the dead water and the live water and so on. Only after that, people came to the streets. And still we can see how long the regime can survive even in Belarus. It's not Russia, it's Belarus, it's more weak. So I wouldn't say that this is the sign of weakness. It's the sign of different type of the rule. Because Putin, with his KGB background and all his cronies, they know only about the fear. It's their mode to deal with the people. They know that through the fear, you can rule. but they don't know anything about trust, cooperation, about any other sort of communication. It's what their school, I mean the KGB school. Yeah, so they will proceed to reign with the fear, and the limit is not reached yet.
With Navalny in a penal colony, how do you see things developing in the coming months?
I mean, to make any predictions, he will be in the colony. The protest will follow. I mean, I will not even risk to predict anything. I mean, it's clear that it's only the beginning of the long round 2, I would say.
Right.
But what will happen, I don't know.
You know, my only feeling of optimism about what's happened is that the situation now in Russia has gotten to the point where people are really, really suffering economically. And it seems to me, if we look back at the collapse of the Soviet Union, I mean, the economic deterioration of the people's lives had a huge role in it. And I think that now we're seeing a situation where the Russian economy is not going to get any better. Oil prices aren't going to go up. People's incomes, I think 10%, the average income is 10% less than it was 4 years ago. It's there, and so this makes them more receptive to Navalny's message of corruption and, you know, what are these people doing? I'm not saying I think that the Kremlin is going to order Navalny's release anytime soon, or that Putin is going to be overthrown anytime soon. But I think we are seeing the beginning of a gradual degradation of this absolute power. And I don't think that that the Kremlin, as it is now, will continue until Navalny's term is up. But I'm always optimistic.
It's good to have one optimist in the team.
Will not continue as it is now, this kind of harsh reprisals against demonstrators, or keeping Navalny in prison? What do you expect might change?
I mean, from this point of from today's point of view, nothing can change. But always, I mean, there is always something unexpected. I mean, who expected Navalny to come back so fast? So with such a strength, with such a dignity. I mean, it was unpredictable, but it happened. So I mean, it's time for some people to come, for some actors to appear. If they will appear, they will push the situation further by themselves.
This book is being translated into 13 languages. Is that correct?
14 languages in 15 countries.
Right. So this portrayal of a certain Russia is certainly going to be read, and we hope read widely. And the book has come out in Russia as well in November. So.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say something also, Sergei, about your portrayal of the 2 men who come over to carry out this poisoning in Germany. I think that it kind of brings to mind again the 2 gentlemen, the 2 FSB officers that went over to kill Mr. Litvinenko. And of course, we know now Andrei Lugovoy is a member of parliament and a very vocal, yes, I mean, it's terrible that he's in the position that he is in the Russian government. And I think
he writes the laws for us.
Yes, it says he's an assassin, and it's proven. So, but it's just interesting because at this level, you see this kind of bungling. I mean, Lugovoy and Koftun, the two killers of Litvinenko, they got polonium, they contaminated the plane, they messed up, they didn't do everything right, and they got caught, right? I mean, in the end, Litvinenko was supposed to die, and they weren't going to discover that he had polonium. And then you look at the Skripal poison, and those guys, they left the perfume bottle with Novichok in the, you know, in that trash thing. And I find it so interesting that again, even with the Navalny case, we see a lot of bungling. The FSB guy who picked up the phone and talked to Navalny for, you know, 45 minutes and didn't even clue in. And so this, I guess, goes back to this thing about whether, you know, is really the Kremlin so in power and so much in control? I mean, if you look at it a different way, you could say they really messed up, and that they hire people who really aren't actually that efficient and that good at their jobs.
Well, we do the same thing. Don't forget the attempt by the CIA to poison Castro's cigars. I mean, there have been very many bungled attempts as well. But yes, you're absolutely right that the KGB, the FSB isn't as good as it ought to be.
Yeah, but I mean, okay, take the case of Jamal Khashoggi. On the second day, they are all exposed. All the CCTV cameras, all the routes of their planes, all the team is exposed immediately. But I mean, it's a new era. The evil is not hidden anymore. And when you look closely on it, yes, it looks strange. I mean, it's not, they are not James Bonds, it's clearly. But still, I mean, it never helped Jamal Khashoggi. And the same thing, I mean, I have a little bit different point of view. I mean, I take them seriously. They are stupid. They are maybe not as skilled as we think them they should be. But I mean, all the Soviet officers were of the same capacity. If you go through the papers of the Great Terror of 1937, I mean, they were mostly illiterate. I mean, they were not able to compose the text properly, but it was of no help or of no use for their victims. And now it's the same. I mean, maybe they are not as fashionable or as effective, but still they are winning. In Russia, they are winning clearly. And it was strange for me because for 2 or 3 years since the Skripal poisoning and now after Navalny case, a lot of Russian experts, Russian intelligence, they made it a tradition to make fun of this. I mean, it's the KGB. I mean, it's the Federal Security Service is bad. The KGB was more experienced and so on. But I mean, guys, you are not in a position to say such a thing. It's you who are poisoned, and you can do nothing about this. I mean, the people who never spoke about the lustration processes, the people who never spoke about the dissolution of the KGB or the Federal Security Service, they just make fun of this. And I think that it's a serious issue. And if you want the change to come, you should learn some lessons, especially from the Eastern and Western Germany. You should learn lessons of how Germans acted towards the Stasi.
I think that's very true. And I think we have a tendency here in the West to look back and say, oh, the Yeltsin regime was democracy. And then Putin came along and brought in all these people from the KGB and he changed things. But actually, Yeltsin did not do what he should have done, which was to really get rid of these people who had committed these crimes. And he didn't do it. He left this criminal element sort of simmering under the surface where it was bound to emerge. Wouldn't you agree, Sergei?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because of course in the 80s, KGB made a huge effort to improve their image, to improve their shape, to distance themselves from the Stalin's era organs and so on. And the principal question was about the responsibility for the Soviet crimes. Who is responsible, or even the very question of responsibility. And what we have now, we have quite a strange situation of the crime punishment without crime. We have victims, millions of them, they are victims in the juridical terms. We have very uncertain understanding of what was the crime which was committed against them. In the Russian law, it's very vague, and we have no criminals. Nobody was punished actually for everything what was done by the Soviet Union. And now in Russia we go for the same circle once again, for the circle of irresponsibility.
Sergei,
Because
do you mean that if there had been the equivalent of the Nuremberg trials in Russia after the Soviet Union, the second spiral might not have happened?
I mean, it would have been easier to I mean, there were some critical links of transit. Of course, when you keep the same state insecurity service with the same traditions, with the same people, with the huge influence through their network, I mean, network of agents, trusted persons, and so on, what would you expect? What would you expect? Yes, and they immediately started to rule with the same means as they always did, because as you remember probably, the Chechen War, the precursor for the Chechen War, was this special op by this time FSK, Федеральная служба контрразведки, which pretended that there was a opposition, Chechen opposition invading Grozny. Yeah, but when the tanks were stopped by the Chechens, when they took the tankists out, it was the Russian officers who were hired by the FSK. They spoke openly about this. And when you see many years ago in Ukraine, in the east of Ukraine, again the same story. There are some opposition or the separatist tanks, but when you open the tank, there is a Russian officer inside. And this is the same modus operandi for 25 years.
And of course, it's not a coincidence that Mr. Putin rose to power because of the Chechen War. The claims that it was the Chechens who were behind the apartment bombings in 1999. And Putin just capitalized on that and on the Russian dislike of the Chechens, right?
I mean, I have quite a strange explanation for this. You know, in the late Soviet Union, it was a clear state monopoly on violence. It was a clear, more or less clear guidelines, what you should do, not if you don't want to be executed. It was clear world. This monopoly was blown up in the 90s. The criminal violence, the terrorist violence, the wars, and so on. Suddenly, instead of one source of violence, it became absolutely irregular, absolutely absurd. And of course, people who were used to have this firm hand, people who were used to have this main legal clear source of violence, they wanted this picture of the world back. And of course, Putin raised on the Chechen war. It's 100%, because you cannot explain in terms of normal career that in 1996 he's an unknown deputy of the mayor in St. Petersburg, the man who is not known for the whole Russian population, and 4 years after he is the president of Russia. I mean, there is something is not working in this. He was inflated. He was created like a figure, like a man who will stand between you and your fears. and fears were immense in 1999. I do remember this time. I was 18 in this moment, and I was supposed to go to the army in this moment and to fight in Chechnya, because I was assigned to the Marines. I do remember this.
Sergei, do you think that one of the things about, and I think your psychological portrait of the scientist is really brilliant. I mean, the nuances and just the whole moral compromise question. It's fascinating, but I'm just curious. Do you think that is it obvious to most people that if orders are given to poison someone or kill someone abroad, or Navalny, what do you say to people if they say, well, Putin might not have known about this? I mean, is there always an order from the very top?
Okay, I would say that from my experience, how it was organized in the Soviet Union, if you have a figure, the local figure, the small figure, you should acquire the order from the very top of the KGB, which probably means that if you have an object which is well known and so on, you should go higher than the KGB itself. And in this particular case, I think it's absolutely, at least for me, clear that it was only the one man who was able, maybe not to give an order, the written one, but in one form or another, to give a permission or to keep a blind eye or something like this, because it's a federal level, and on the federal level, okay. And also clear for me that Navalny was for a long period the object of what is called the operational activity, because all what we know, there's legal charges, the arrest of his brother, the long chain of violence against him. Once he was thrown at the Lonka and so on and so on. It's not just the different actors. I would say that it's the part of one file. It's the part of the job of one department, of some particular person who has the rank and the name, who is responsible for the operational activity against Mr. Navalny or against his group, which is called FBK.
You mentioned the Khashoggi case. It's very possible that at some point we'll see a Saudi Lebedev, but for now, Russia and the Russian literary tradition has produced Sergei Lebedev and this growing body of work of yours. You are trying to change the direction of literature, or as a writer to deal with go in a different direction. What are your hopes in particular for this one book?
Sorry?
What are your hopes for a political impact for this book? Do you hope that this book could have a political impact?
I mean, Michael, seriously, the books are strange. They can do nothing and they can do anything. Yeah. It's about fate and magic. You do what is right to do and you wait. In the long run, literature always wins. So hopefully this run will not be so long. But you are not writing them to have the immediate political impact. It's more or less about clarification. You are bringing something, maybe the light, maybe something else, and they start to live their own lives. For some people, they meet these people. It's about interaction and patience, time and patience.
Perfect.
Yeah, like this.
Absolutely perfect.
Thank you. I think that's a good way to end.
Yeah, super.
Okay.
Thank you everybody for this evening, for this talk, and have a good evening for me and the midday for you.
Evan, okay.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. That was just such an interesting and wonderful conversation. Thank you again to Antonina Bouis, Michael Wise, Amy Knight, and Sergei Lebedev for joining us tonight. It's really so great to kind of be a witness to these conversations. It's just so much to take in, and I really can't recommend this book enough. If you want to order it right now, we've got a link below to our bookshop page. It'll ship right to you. We are currently closed for renovations at 192 Books, but if you want to pre-order the book or for when we reopen next week on Tuesday, just send us an email or visit our website, and we can make it happen. Our next event is Wednesday, February 10th at 6 p.m. with Andre Gregory and Joan Wickersham. They're going to be talking about Andre's new book, This Is Not My Memoir. That is February 10th at 6 o'clock. So we'll hope to see you there. And yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for joining, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. That was great.